Hello and welcome back, everyone. My name is Ryan Selvy, and I'm a motion designer, graphic designer, illustrator here on Adobe Live. Today, we are on day 2 of the After Effects challenge for this week, where we are animating a 3D diorama in After Effects. So we're going to look at the completed thing here. We have it panning from left to right. You can see that it's living in 3D space. It's inspired by Paper Mario or by Cult of the Lamb. It's this idea where things are in 3D space, but they still feel like they're 2D. Today, we're going to be going over a few ways that we can animate some characters and add motion and life to this piece. We used a combination of Photoshop and Illustrator in this example, and I'll be showing you kind of how I built it out and what it looks like. Real quick, as we hop into it, this is a live stream, so I just want to say hello to a bunch of people in the chat, like Cody, Kubra, Umacorn, Rob, Oliver, Clever, and Jack. Of course, if you're watching the replay of this, though, it should still be just as useful and resourceful. If you have any questions, though, be sure to hop on into the Discord for the Premiere challenges, and I'll be there answering any questions and being excited to see what you make. So without further ado, I'm going to hop right into Photoshop here. And I went ahead, and you can get all these assets in the provided link for your starter files. And this one is under sweeping.psd. I used the timeline function within Photoshop to quickly just create a animated character. You can see that with this style, you don't really have to add a lot of extra frames. You don't have to figure out how to really do a basic heavy animating. You can really just kind of do a flip book if you ever grew up and did it. And then when we add it into the space, the smooth motion of left to right is going to make it feel a lot more alive. So just to show you the back end of how this looks within Photoshop is we have this sweeping and I have a character that actually we have also the dusting also available right here, which we don't want to see. And all I did was I just drew this first character and I basically knew that I wanted him to sweep. So if you look at the actual change between sweeping 1 and sweeping 2, you can see that actually this function of his body is the same. All I really did was go in and I just created 2 frames that we could then go back and forth from. And when you go in, you adjust the length in between, then it makes it feel like it's going back and forth, just like a flip book when you're going up and down. So, once again, sorry, there's a New York City, baby. Sorry for the siren. So all I did when I was creating this is I actually just went in. I initially just took out a stylus. I just drew. I'm using my pen, not my pen right now. I'm using my mouse. But I just drew like a stick figure. I knew that was going to be my base, and then I was like, okay, I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to say we're just going to create a arm and an arm, and then I knew I could go into my next frame, and we were going to actually see that these are 2 different layers. So I just make that second one invisible. And then I add like another kind of, we'll say like, we'll go here and here, which when we flip the 2, it just suddenly looks like he's going back and forth. So the way that we take that, we export it into a PNG for us to use into our product. In this case, we already have it pre-made. It is just going back and forth. This is mostly an After Effects tutorial, so we can get more in depth into Photoshop about that in Discord if you guys need to. Oliver says, I thought that siren was here and wondered why it randomly stopped. Yeah, no, that was good old New York. So in the 3D space that we built out yesterday, we went in and we can look at 4 views just like we did the other day. And we have our top view, our custom view, active camera, and from the left, you can see in the left pane, everything is kind of just back and forward on this Z space. So this stuff's in the very back, this is in the very front. If we click on it, we can actually see what it is. So this is the table. The table is probably closest to the camera. And the trees back here and the hills that you can barely see through the window here are firmly in the back. The cool thing about having all of this work out is, okay, so we're gonna kind of move along this path, and we have this little dude here. He's not our sweeper though. We were looking at our sweeper, weren't we? So we have our little sweeper here, and he just exists in this 3D space. And what's really cool is you can actually make pre-comps a piece of asset that can move along a 3D space. So in this case, I ended up creating a composition. The way that I actually started doing this is I went through and I found the asset that I wanted. So we're going to go through and we'll say that that asset for the animating is sweeping 1, which we have right here, which is unanimated. I'm going to drag it into my space. I'm going to make it 3D so that it exists in the 3D area. In my custom view, I can see that it's not where I want it to be. We're going to move it over. He's a little too tiny. We can increase the scale of it. So we can say, all right, we're going to make you like 150. And same sort of thing. Like we're going to want to bring him up on the active camera so that his feet are somewhere along the bottom of the floor. Now we can see in our left camera that he still isn't fully down. So we're going to go and we're going to adjust the y-axis so that he meets the floor. And then we can also look at our custom view and we can pan around to kind of see if this is where he stands. I kind of want him closer to the camera too. So we're going to bring him in. He's going to become a little bit bigger. You can also use this opportunity to actually adjust the anchor point if you'd like as well. So I'm going to press A while I'm having this selected in my timeline. And I can go ahead and I can move the anchor point down to his feet because that's the part that I think is most important. You'll see that when I do that, it lifts him off the ground. So we're going to adjust accordingly to make sure that that anchor point is down and in contact with the floor. So now we have it. Maybe I want to make him a little bit bigger. Let's make him 200. But when we scale him up this time, he's going to be in the relation to the bottom of his feet because that's where we put the anchor point. But now we want to make sure that he's still attached to the null, just like anything else. And when we do that, we can see that he moves along our new camera movement. But as we were mentioning before, there is no animation in this character at this moment. So we're going to go in here. We can right click. We can go to pre-compose. We want to leave all attributes in the main because we don't want any of that animation in our new pre-composition. And now we just have this little dude in its own composition. He's not moving. And we can see that he has a transparent background. What I like to do is I normally like to give myself a little bit more space. So I'll go into composition settings and go to advanced. Make sure that we are maybe going from the bottom because that's where we want to be, expanding out of. Then go back to basic. And then maybe just adjust this to add a few extra pixels for our sake. Same with height. And we know that over in our main composition, this is being reflected by expanding up and out because our anchor point is at the bottom of this character. So I'm going to go back into my assets over here on the left, and we're going to go and grab our sweeping 2. And what we can do here is we can line it up, and we can see that they're just on top of each other. They're the same size. You can double check by going into scale. They're both going to be at 100 because the scaling modifications when we left the attributes on the previous composition are all the ones that are modifying the content that's in this pre-comp, but on a higher level. So here we can still work in 100% and we don't have to worry about any discrepancies between the main composition and this because we just have to focus on this pre-composition. Now, they're both visible at the same time, and there's a few different ways that you can actually make this go back and forth. You could potentially go and, increase or decrease the size of the timeline of both of these by clicking on them, pressing Alt, right bracket, or Option, I believe, if you're on Mac. And let's say that we want this to be like 2 frames, and you could go and you could duplicate these over and over again. You could move them up and you can make them kind of go along this way if that's kind of what you want, but sometimes that can be hard on your system and it can get real disconnected. We can also see that when we're doing that, he's moving back and forth, but I don't want to do it like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually bring down this transparency. Press T to open up the opacity. I want to make sure that he is lined up perfectly. And now that we're in opacity, we can also use that function as a means to play with what is visible and what is not visible and go back and forth in this idea of a looping animation. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to create a time keyframe by clicking on the little clock next to opacity. I'm going to move 2 frames over here, and I'm going to do the same thing. And then I'm going to go one more time and with the same distance, and click that. Now these are going to have them all move in between the opacity. I want to go and I want to create a 0 so that it goes away, but you can see that it kind of fades. We don't want necessarily that fading to happen. And what we want to do is you can just right click or toggle hold keyframe, and then it will just switch without having any sort of tweening. In the chat, Valder is saying, I like to use the difference blend mode for perfect alignment. When you set the layer on top to difference and when it's all black, it's aligned. That's a great tip. If you want to go into blend modes, you just have to make sure that it is activated down here by expand or collapse the transfer control panes. And we can see by here, if we go into our blend mode and we go into, you said difference, right? And difference, you can see exactly where everything is actually being met up. So if we're checking down at the feet, you can also see that it's black, just like Valder was saying, and we know that it is perfectly aligned, which is nice. That's a great tip. Thanks for mentioning that in chat. But the problem that we have here with the opacity coming and going is that it is going invisible at the same time. We want to make sure that it alternates. So I'm going to right click these. I'm going to go to keyframe assistant, and I'm going to change time reverse keyframes. So that'll make my 0 and then 100. And then we want to make sure that this is actually the same as this one. So I'm actually going to delete it and place it to make sure that this is 0 and this is 100. And we can go and toggle this to hold keyframes. That way it goes like this. Now it stops after the first one, and we don't want that. So what we're going to do is we're going to alt click and create an expression here. And I'm going to go and I'm just going to say loop out. That's all we need to do. I'm going to do the same thing for here. All right, loop out. It'll help you out with it a little bit. And then when we play it through now, it will continue to go forward and forward and forward. Now, maybe he's getting a little too crazy about that dusting and that sweeping. We want him to slow down a little bit. The cool thing is you can just click and drag and highlight this, and as long as they stay lined up, you can hold down Alt, I believe, or Option, and you can click and drag, and it will make the changes while keeping the space in between them equidistant for the other keyframes. So you can stretch it or you can shrink it as much as you want, and when we do that, we'll see that maybe it'll sweep a little bit slower. Now, we can see here that he is jumping just a little bit, but that's fine because he's also going to be moving, and also it's part of the allure of it. One other cool thing that we can do actually is we can go in and we have a dirt layer, which I might not even have included in here, but it is in our assets. So I'm going to go over to our folder, which is provided in the starter files, go to assets. We're going to pick up dirt. I'm just going to throw it in. And what's cool here is this is not tied to the rest of it. And what we can do is we can add a scale and a transparency and keyframe these guys and bring it up, keyframe a little bit more. And what I want to do is I kind of want it to increase a bit and then go invisible. I also want it to start invisible, and then I want in the middle of it to be at 100. So maybe this looks like this. That's way too fast for us. We're going to stretch it out a lot. And then same sort of thing. If we want to, we can loop out this situation. We can also add other ones if we want. And the reason that I'm bringing all this up is there are many other ways that we can also continue to animate this. One cool thing is we can also use the puppet tool, which I'll use in just a second. I'll show you guys kind of how that looks with maybe a tree that we can animate. But you can get creative in ways that are animating. And when you think of animating, I feel like a lot of times people get really nervous. They think that it's going to be a lot of work, because a lot of times it can be a lot of work. But there's other times where you can actually just make really small adjustments to what the viewer is seeing. And since there's motion and change, they're going to automatically fill in the blanks in their head. Because when you actually look into like real animation, a lot of times their frames per second can be as low as like 8 frames per second. So you only need to create like an 8 frame difference within a second in order for the brain to take everything and collect it all. Oliver is mentioning extreme dusting, and Valder is saying that he coughed a little bit from the dust, which is funny. So we're going to do the same thing here, where we want to make the opacity 100 at some point, but we want at the beginning and the end for it to be 0. And we're going to do an increase in scale here, where maybe it's like, I don't know, like 80%. We don't want to make it 0. We don't want to zoom in entirely. We'll do the same thing here. And we can then actually go and also loop out these guys as well if we want to, by doing the same exact thing where we say loop out and loop out. And sometimes I like to just add like a little buffer to it. You can go in and I just go and I copy and paste the same keyframes just to say, wait a little bit before you do it again. I think there's also a way you can also do that in expressions. I will look it up when we are off stream today, and I will give you guys an update tomorrow about it. But you can see now it loops, but it's not immediate. It takes a little bit of time. We forgot to add the loop out to here, so we'll just do that real quick. You can also do a thing where you can select and go to edit, copy expression only, and then you can collect a bunch of different properties and then go and paste it onto said property or something. And that can also help it if you're adjusting a lot of things. But in this case, we're only just doing 2 things, so we don't really have to necessarily do that. But now we have this little animated guy. And then when we go back to main, we can see that now, even though it's in 3D and we did all that in 2D, that as we move along, he's just doing his little sweeping thing. I'll change actually to 1 view so we can see it a little bit better. He's doing his sweeping thing, but it's living in a 3D space, which is really cool. And it's moving and it's showing behind it. And so that's one way we can do it with maybe cell animation, which is one way. But another way we can do it is we can play around with maybe some of these trees in the background. So we have, let's find a good tree. I want to adjust this tree. And this tree is a pine 2. We're going to right click. We're going to go to pre-compose. I want to say call this swaying tree, just so that we know what it is. Leave all attributes in main. I like to go in and I like to show the transparency tool. We're going to do the same thing again, where we go into our composition settings. We're going to go into advanced. We're going to go to the bottom. We're going to adjust the width a little bit and the height a little bit, like this and like that. And then we're going to want to add a little bit of flare to this pine. So if you go up here in this little thumbtack, we have this flurry of tools that we can use, different types of position pin tools, starch pin tools, bend pin tools, advanced pin tools, and overlap pin tools. Today we're just going to mostly focus on the position pin tool. Tomorrow we can even kind of look in and starch when things different move or when bends work. We might even work on bend today. I can show you guys how it kind of works in the theory of this guy. And so we're just going to go ahead, and the way this works is you go and you click and it will create a mesh for you. And you can create different parts where you want to move and change how the tree can move in this case. So what I want to happen is if you hover over, you can also see the alpha outline here of everything that will be adjusted within the pins here. And I want to make sure that there's no cutoff here at the very bottom. It's going to be a little too married to that for me, but at the same time, we still want it to be bottom aligned. And what we can do is I want to add a mesh to here. I want to click, and I'm just going to add a few different points where we can add a little bit of flare to our piece. Now, if I go back down to our timeline and press U, it will reveal all of our puppet pin tools. If you want to, you can even go in here and you can name it if that's helpful for you. So we can say top tree pin. We can also go say bottom tree pin. And we can also do trunk. Now, normally you wouldn't have to do this when you're only doing about 3 pins, but when you're messing around with a pin tool, it's really helpful to just stay oriented because it very quickly can get very messy with these. Also in recent After Effects, which is cool, you can actually click on keyframes and you can change their label, which is brilliant. And you can do like lavender, and it changes, or lavender is not that easy to see on the stream, so we'll do like peach. You can see that it changes just that keyframe. And so if we were to go, we know this is our top tree pin, we're going to move it over here, and then we're going to move it over here, a little dancing tree. It's actually moving quite slow because you can see that these are seconds. If we highlight all of these though, and we go to label, we make them all peach. What we can do is we can actually click onto a keyframe, and you can go to select keyframe label group, and you can say either on selected layers or on all layers, and it will go and it will select only the ones that you have labeled in that same color. So it's really cool just to be able to go and kind of have that functionality over your keyframes, because similarly to how we had the other one, we can then also, now since we have them all selected, in this case you could also click and drag and select them all, but you can go and hold Alt and you could expand or contract that as you see fit. It's helpful with these since they are tweening. If you right click Keyframe Assistant and go into Easy Ease, that will add a little bit of ebb and flow to it. If you really want to mess with the curves more, you can go to the graph editor, but that's a whole nother conversation. And as we go here, we can see that it is blowing in the wind a little bit, which is nice. And once again, it might be nice if we do some sort of loop out. Now with this one, we don't necessarily have it right at the same spot that it was. So I'm going to go ahead and do a loop out, and in parentheses we'll do ping pong. That way it will go back and forth. So it will go with these keyframes, and then it's going to reverse and do the other keyframes. It's going to keep going back and forth just like a ping pong. And that's just another way that you can go in here and adjust how this is working with the puppet tool. Now you'll see that we didn't adjust these other bottom tree pins because we don't have to. We have no need for them to move. But let's say that maybe something was moving a little too much and you don't want it to. You can also go in here and use the puppet starch pin tool. And when you add that to a place, it really will make sure that nothing is going to kind of adjust that. And that moves alongside in between the other two pins. When we go back to our main, we can now see that this adjustment is here. It is swaying tree. It is the pre-comp that we have in the same composition. And as it moves, we can see that now the trees are moving a little bit, which is fun. You can also see that tomorrow we'll go over a little bit about how we're going to open up this sliding door. We're going to use similar attention to it. And it's just a way that you can add additional motion to it. Another thing that happens is, let's say that, okay, this was, I'm going to, when I actually switch to show you guys, you'll see me do it, but in theory, it'll also be changed. So this was Pine 2, right? Okay, so let's go to Pine 2. I'm going to hold down Alt, and then we can switch it out. But let's say that you accidentally made a pre-composition, but you didn't actually just go in and right-click it and say pre-comp to it. What you can do is if you go and you locate your pre-comp that you had, we called it swaying tree, and you have your layer that you want to adjust selected, all you have to do is click it, hold down Alt, and then drag it over top of the highlighted, and it will take all of the transformation properties of its position in the 3D space, and it will automatically update it accordingly. So even though it was different placed, we have our pre-comp then replaced into the area that we want, and it will follow all the attributes, including the null, so it moves along as we were making things happen. So that's all we have time for today. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Tune in tomorrow. We'll continue working on animating some characters. We're also going to work on actually how we're going to loop out this product and how we're going to add extra flair. We can also work on lighting later in the week. But I'd love to see what you guys are working on, so make sure you hop into the Premiere Challenge Discord and give me a ping. I'm under just Ryan Selvy on there. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to help you out. And I'd also just love to see what you do. So that's all for me. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you guys tomorrow at the same time, at the same place. Thanks again. Bye.